My name is Naureen Khan and I'm an Associate Director at TechUK. So I'm responsible for digital transformation, looking at central government, but also looking across the public sector around digital government and public services transformation. What is TechUK? We're the trade association for the UK tech industry, so the voice of the tech industry. We've got about 850 members. 500 of them are small businesses.
So Naureen, TechUK, what's your view really on what government needs to do better from a digital transformation point of view, a digital delivery point of view, now that we're seeing the emergence of the so-called digital citizen?
So I think I would say what does government need to do more of? More of the same. So more of a lot of what we've seen in the last 5 years. So continue to support small businesses, continue to promote G-Cloud, as a mechanism for creating a level playing field. Mm-hmm. But if I had to say three things that I think the government needs to be better at, I'd say better engagement. So working with the industry and the market very early on. So I'm talking about at the policy formation stage. Are you thinking about what's out there in the market?
Yeah, so more consultation.
More consultation, and as you know, our industry is very exciting. It's evolving daily, hourly in fact, and actually to keep up with that you really need to kind of be scanning the market constantly. So it's even before the buying process, because that's what we're talking about, government as a buyer. Even if before the buying process begins, you need to start thinking about what's out there in the market. And this is for special advisors, this is for policymakers, this isn't for procurement people or the special IT project. So that's really, really critical, and that's what advanced buying looks like.
Do you sense that, given the so-called austerity agenda, that this has focused minds really on the ability to deliver digital services, not just digital services per se, but better, and thinking a bit more about the process? Absolutely.
And I think in terms of delivering more affordable public services with less money in the bank, digital absolutely has a crucial role there. And I think digital is very much an enabler in helping government deliver more for less and actually more accessible services. If I had to say a second thing, I think that's around better information. So government really needs to know what it's buying, how much it's paying for what it's buying, and then using that information systematically to drive a performance from both the supply side and the buy side. So what am I talking about? So HMRC might be buying a given thing, but another department could be buying the same thing, and actually should they not be pooling together? And are different departments paying different prices for the same thing? And equally, we know from our members that government's collecting a lot of data on what it spends, but is it using that data in a smart way? Is it using that data to make it a better buyer and get more value from both sides? So I think that the better information point is key. I'd say the third point is around more innovation. So, very exciting industry, lots of disruptive technology out there. Is government accessing that? Not really. Why shouldn't it? Why should government be different to any other organisation? And how do you do that? Well, it's that better engagement. It's not being scared to try new things. And sometimes they might not work, and that's okay. You learn and you move on. And then the time to do that is that before what we call the pre-procurement market engagement. So before the formal buying process begins. And that's the time to test, play around, do a couple of prototypes. Some might work, some might not. And I think where you see successful IT delivery, that's where that piece works really well. I mean, at the moment, I think there's a bit of a cultural fear, and which holds the civil servants back from doing that testing, playing around, the fun bit, what should be fun.
There's been a lot of discussion too about opening the market up, the government technology market up a bit more to SMEs. Is that something that TechUK is keen to encourage, or do you feel that the SMEs in the technology industry are being given a fair crack at the whip?
So we think the government should be opening the market up to as many companies as possible, and we fully support the government's commitment to spending more, driving more of the procurement spend through to SMEs. I think now the target's 30%. The targets last time was 25%. I mean, targets aside, it's about creating a level playing field, giving SMEs the opportunities to play, and then the rest is competition. In terms of TechUK, we've got 500 odd SME members. Has the government's kind of commitment and aspiration made a difference to them doing business? G-Cloud has, and actually it's provided a kind of a direct route, but we're still seeing some challenges around the buying. So I think the GDS have done a fantastic job with G Cloud, and they've kind of been evangelists and kind of driving the voice of SMEs. But actually, in terms of the departments and the buying, we haven't quite seen that. And part of that is because a lot of the departments are in big contracts. And as those contracts are starting to come to an end, so I think 2017 and beyond, that's the real window, and that's the opportunity, and that's when the proof will be in the pudding. So what really happens, and how do you attract more SMEs? It's tell them about the opportunities. A lot of them might not even know, and they don't have the resources to go and knock on doors and say, look, this is what we've got to offer. So government has a role there to go out and promote the opportunities, and not just to the small businesses in London, across the UK. That's a 14 to 16 billion spend on, and that's a huge leverage to and buying power for government, which they should be using and absolutely promoting it to small businesses. And we TechUK talk a lot about the scale up kind of companies. So those who have the kind of the mid-sized companies with huge growth potential. So government should also be targeting those companies. Have a lot of innovation to offer. I mean, ultimately, it's competition, but it's levelling out the playing field, and that means going out there, promoting the opportunities. There are specific issues around terms and conditions, the way contracts are formed, and a whole list of other issues which government needs to address as well. And I think they acknowledge that, and they're starting to. But it's difficult. It's very, very difficult.
Okay, well, maybe if we could move on. You mentioned engagement, but you specifically meant engagement between the industry and government. But of course, there's another type of engagement, that of better citizen to government engagement. And what would you say the engagement challenges are? Given the current stock of government services, particularly central government services, some of the big transactional based services have yet to be properly digitised. But what coming down to the line do you think are those critical services that need to be transformed?
So I think in the last 5 years you saw the government digital service take an approach in terms of the 25 exemplars, so the 25 kind of high volume transactions, and they took that approach. In terms of, I guess, engagement with citizens, I think citizens are interested in accessible services, services that are user-friendly, that are fast, and that are making an impact in their day-to-day life, in the same way they're consuming other services like online banking, from every other aspect of their life. So I think that's really the engagement piece. It's actually how they're interacting with government, in how they're accessing those services. I think government needs to remember that not everybody has the same level of digital capability. That digital inclusion piece is really important. And that has to be in line with the wider digitisation of public services. Is there one or two specific things that we think the government should prioritise? I wouldn't say so. I think it's a very difficult job that government has to do. So and there's a kind of a wholesale transformation that's taking place. It's not just about the service side. It's about the government as an organisation using technology, becoming more efficient in the way they work. So I think there's that side too, and I think all of that will filter down to the citizen through how they receive and are consuming those services.
There's also another element that we're seeing emerge, the whole idea that citizens all have to be stakeholders themselves, that there's a much greater participation in defining how the service should work based on user experience and so on. And do you sense that government is actually embracing the idea of getting citizens involved in defining how the service should look and feel from a usability point of view? So
I think this is a big thing that Mike Bracken, GDS, talks about, user needs, and how would you define user? Well, citizens are a key part of that. Now, I think GDS get it. Does the wider public sector get it? Not quite, and I think we're very far away from that. And why is that? I think partly because you saw a decade of where a lot of the IT was outsourced, and the government's going through its own transformation and trying to kind of bring some of that back in, develop its capability, and I think it's on that journey. And as it furthers, it does need to involve citizens. It's kind of with any product or service, you need to do the user testing, the people who are actually using it. So I think that will be critical. It's not happening as much as it should be, but that's because of where we are in the transformation journey.
Okay. And Just finally, in terms of TechUK's perspective on what services should be targeted in terms of digital transformation, do you have from an organ? I know GDS's perspective, the 25 targets and so on, but from your point of view and your members' point of view, what services should be targeted? What in most critical need of transformation?
So I would say on there, government has a very difficult job to do across the board, and our role is really that engagement piece and working with the departments, central government departments, and across wider public sector in terms of wholesale transformation. Whether we don't really have one or two specific projects that we think government needs to prioritise, because there's a wholesale transformation that's going on.
Mm-hmm. There was a criticism that some of the rollout of services required digital engagement in order to deliver them, and you mentioned earlier digital inclusion, so therefore there's a kind of catch-22 situation that it's very difficult to roll out a new digital-only service or a digital by default service when in fact the target audience isn't digitally equipped. Is that going to be a delimiter of the extent to which some of these new services might be?
I don't think so. If you think about if I flip it around in terms of services, if you think how the private sector actually have taken the approach, so banking, there's online banking, but you can still go into a branch and you can have that face-to-face interaction. There probably not as many kind of frontline staff in banks because they're digitising it, and equally I think the government just needs to take it's kind of user needs approach. So actually the digitisation is important, but equally you've got to kind of also remember that there's a group who have certain needs and need to make those services accessible. So what digitising should be doing, if it's done right, is reducing costs, and the savings then you can plough back into some of the critical frontline services which require that face-to-face interaction. So I think it can work both ways.
Okay.